Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for being here. Thanks for your patience as it took us a few minutes to get started. My name is Tracy Starr, and I have the pleasure of being the communications director for this fantastic candidates campaign. If I talk closer to, I took the worst mic, so Will's got the better one, just so you know.
Thank you, Tracy.
Was that better? Could you hear him? Okay, don't worry about me so much. So what we'll do tonight is Will introduce himself to you. Then I've got your questions that you submitted before, and then we'll take any other questions that may have been inspired by what you hear from Will tonight. And then afterwards, we will have an opportunity for everybody to take selfies because who doesn't want to do that now and post those to social media. Hi, folks at home. Thanks for joining us virtually. If you are on social tonight or any night, we would love it if you posted about being here. We're using the hashtags, hashtag Wills and Wildomar, and hashtag Wills right here. Hashtag where's your rep? Will's right here. Okay. With that, I will turn it over to you, Will, to introduce yourself. You do it best.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you for moderating. I really appreciate everything you've done for the campaign. I want to say thanks to Vanessa Lopez for having us here at her beautiful home. Round of applause for Vanessa. This is an amazing backyard. The weather is perfect. I cannot tell you how happy I am to not be sweating profusely right now. That's the best part about this side of the district right now, right? So thank you to everybody, also the volunteers who came and helped set this event up. Incredibly grateful to all of you. Thanks to everybody for coming and showing up and caring about the future of our democracy. Thank you to Brian Nash for coming, another great candidate running in our communities here. And thanks to any Republicans who also came. I am especially grateful to you for keeping an open mind. I just met one guy on the street who asked me about whether I'm going to be supporting Joe Biden in 2024. He didn't actually come into the town hall, but he got that response on tape. So hopefully next time he'll come in and actually engage with us. But I really do, if there's anybody watching too, who's not a Democrat, who's a moderate Republican, who's an independent, thank you for keeping an open mind. Thank you for letting me try to win your vote too, because I think that I can earn it. And I think I can do a better job of representing our communities than Ken Calvert, who's represented this area for the last 30 years. So, and I want to earn your vote. I want to deserve it. I have to work hard to get it, and I'm committed to doing that. So, look, I'll start off by telling you all a little bit just about myself and why I decided to do this. So I'm Will Rollins. I'm the Democratic nominee for Congress in California's 41st. I spent the last 5 years as a federal prosecutor where I specialized in counterterrorism and counterintelligence cases. I ended up entering this race because really there's three things that I think we need to worry about as a congressional district, right? So we've got to get somebody in office who cares about protecting our communities from extremism, who cares about keeping the government out of our bedrooms, and who cares about fighting against the type of corruption that has contributed to rising costs for every single person sitting here, because that affects our lives daily. But the longer story of why I got into this race, I always joke, begins where all popular kids started off in high school, which is Model UN. I see a couple other people know what I'm talking about here. So when I was a junior in high school, I walked in my first class of the day, which was Model UN. It was September 11th, 2001, and somebody turned on the TV, and we saw the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapse. And I immediately started thinking, like many kids who are about 16, 17, about enlisting. And in my case, there was one big problem. I was a closeted gay kid, still against the law to serve openly in the US military, but knew I'd have to find a different path to service because I was scared of being outed and didn't want to humiliate myself. So thought about joining the CIA, eventually made it to Columbia Law School, clerked for a couple federal judges, and got hired as a federal prosecutor here in the Central District of California. And so that experience, and by the way, I'm the only candidate in this race who spent the last 5 years working day and night to protect every single person who lives in this congressional district. And It is an absolute privilege to do that. And a lot of you have heard me talk about some of my national security experience before, but I thought I would start off tonight actually telling you a little bit about some of the other cases that I worked on after I was hired as a federal prosecutor to protect all of us here in Southern California, right? So I started my job in September of 2016. 6 weeks later, they said, you're gonna have your first trial. And it's gonna be, yes, that was the face I made, actually. And it was against a doctor who was prescribing opioids in exchange for cash, right? And what he was doing was taking hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash and depositing it at 4 different banks around his medical clinics and structuring those transactions under the $10,000 limit. And he was using Medicare beneficiaries, our tax dollars, by the way, to write the prescriptions. They'd go out and fill the prescriptions for opiates, give them to street dealers, and then street dealers would sell it for cash. Cash would come back into the office. And fortunately, he was convicted. But I know that a lot of us in Southern California have been affected by the opioid epidemic. And I was incredibly proud to be a part of the team that helped fight against that kind of corruption in our communities. Another case that I worked on when I first started in the office involved MS-13. Worked on some really difficult gang violence cases involving MS-13, the Sinaloa cartel, a drug dealer who was conspiring with a flight attendant to bring millions of dollars of cocaine on commercial jets from LAX to New York, against a Ponzi scheme organizer who defrauded hundreds of seniors out of their retirement savings, against a guy who operated a fake lottery scam, again, defrauding seniors, trying to trick people into convincing them that they had won the lottery and taking their money afterwards. But my passion really always had been, as I mentioned earlier, you know, from being a kid, national security. And so when it came time for me to be able to specialize, I wanted to go into counterterrorism and counterintelligence. And I was lucky enough to get into that section in the office and absolutely loved being a part of the team that works with the FBI to protect our country from threats that we face from Russia, Iran, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, China. But as all of us have seen on the news, lately there's been a huge rise in the threats that this country faces from domestic extremism. So whether it was neo-Nazis going after Charlottesville, QAnon conspiracy theorists going after US Navy hospital ships because they thought COVID was part of a government conspiracy, huge rise in anti-Semitism, huge rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans, and then an incident like January 6th, which led to 140 police officers being injured as they tried to protect those people inside, people like Ken Calvert, during the peaceful transfer of power, what was supposed to be the peaceful transfer of power. And it was responding to that attack and also listening to Ken Calvert's comments after January 6th, in August of 2021. You can look at this online if you haven't already, Google it. He gave this recorded interview where he called for dropping charges against the people who attacked our Capitol. And as somebody who worked in law enforcement, somebody who grew up in a family of Republicans and Democrats, who cares about the rule of law, that kind of comment, the kind of comment that he made last week saying that the FBI is infiltrated by rot, that is a remarkable statement to hear from a sitting member of Congress. And all of us, regardless of party, should stand against that in this election because our democracy is on the line. And a lot of you have heard me talk before a little bit about what I think we need to do to sort of address these systemic divisions that are really ripping the country apart, right? And things that lead people to going to the Capitol and believing that the last election had been stolen. And I often tell the story about a Beverly Hills salon owner who became convinced that she needed to stop the steal, packed up her luggage, flew back, stood on the steps of the US Capitol with a bullhorn, called for angry patriots to bring in their gas masks and weapons, and then stood in a hallway as one of her fellow rioters crushed a police officer at a door. And the question that I've asked myself time and time again, and what I think all of us as Americans have an obligation to ask ourselves, is how do we prevent our fellow citizens from becoming so radicalized that they think they need to invade the US Capitol for the first time since the War of 1812? Because that happened in our lifetimes. And it is up to us, our generations of Americans alive today, to come up with a solution to prevent that from happening again. This is an incredibly complex problem. I'm not going to pretend that I have all of the answers to it, but I have three basic ideas about our broken information system, right? One, let's create a modern and revitalized version of the fairness doctrine so that it's not just Tucker Carlson all day, every day on one channel, Rachel Maddow all day, every day on the other channel, right? There's substantive, meaningful debate. We create incentives for that. Second thing we can do, require transparency in advertising, right? One of the most popular threads on Reddit, two robots just saying nasty things to each other back and forth, drawing in real Americans, designed to divide Americans against each other. And I can tell you as somebody who has worked in counterintelligence, that this kind of technology is something that the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians are all too eager to exploit. Because when we turn against each other, when Republicans and Democrats can't even agree on the same basic set of facts, when we can't look at each other without getting enraged, when you're caught up so deeply in whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump, that is exactly what our enemies want us to be doing. They want us to be at each other's throats. And so every time, and I ask this of everybody here, we've all got Republican friends, we've all got Republicans in our families, right? Let's remember when we get into these debates, the Chinese, the Iranians want us to be at each other's throats, and they want to exploit our divisions. And so it's incumbent on all of us to return to basic civil discourse. And it's hard to do, and I get it. But it's something that we all have an obligation to try to do. And that leads me to my sort of third basic point about how we fix this, which is accountability for big tech, right? And I always ask, how many people are small business owners? We have any small business owners here tonight? A few hands gone up. How many people would feel comfortable putting out a sign in your window that said, I've got a magic potion that cures cancer, and buy it? No hands go up, because people are about legal liability, right? False advertising. Those same rules that apply to small business owners have to apply to the largest multi-billion-dollar corporations that are profiting by spreading division and lies through their algorithms, and they know it. And so we've got to update our rules to provide some basic accountability for those companies, because they are not above the law, just like anybody else, right? So I start off talking about our broken information system because I really believe that unless you have candidates talking about how we're going to fix this problem, everything else that flows from there is impossible. So when people like me are running for office and they promise to deliver on climate change, on healthcare, on the economy, all issues that I look forward to talking about with you all tonight, I think those promises are empty unless we can come up with a plan as a country to return us to a place where our disagreements are constructive and we create meaningful compromise between the left and the right. And we cannot do that unless we fix our broken information system. So the good news is when we do that, there's a lot to agree on. And I'm looking forward to talking about all of these issues with Tracy. And so I'll turn it over to her for some Q&A, and then looking forward to chatting with you when we've got some time at the end.
Fantastic. Thanks, Will. My cord doesn't reach my chair. I've just found out. Isn't he a great candidate?
This is a totally neutral moderator, just for the record.
I never claim to be unbiased. All right, so I've taken some cards from you folks before we got started. First question, Mr. Rollins. This is from Heidi. How exactly will you tackle the problem we have with corruption in politics? How do we get the money out of it?
Great question. So, look, this does affect our daily lives. And let's start off by thinking about inflation and gas prices. So fortunately, we've gotten a little bit of reprieve lately, still too high, but look how many companies control the oil market in the United States, roughly 4. They've got monopoly power over prices. And when you talk to people like Warren Buffett and you say, Warren Buffett, which companies should we invest in? He says, look for the companies that have moats around them, meaning they have total control of price. And that's companies like Shell, ExxonMobil, Chevron. And so when you look at the record prices that we've paid this year in Southern California, and you look at their record profits, Shell posting $9 billion in record quarterly profit recently and keeping a margin of 20%, turning back to the small business owners, costs go up. If you want to keep customers in a competitive market, you have to cut into your own margins. Shell, Chevron, they don't have to do that because they don't have competitors. And so the reason I raised this in the context of corruption, because it contributes directly to votes like what Ken Calvert just did against the price gouging legislation. He is somebody who's gotten hundreds of thousands of dollars from the oil and gas industry, and it is no coincidence that he's voted against price gouging, which leads me to my first proposal: ban all corporate campaign contributions. Really proud to not take a cent from corporate PACs in this campaign. I'm really proud to have consistently outraised Ken Calvert, who's getting still hundreds of thousands per quarter from corporations, but we're funded by human beings. And look, after Citizens United, it is going to be a challenge because there are First Amendment constraints given this Supreme Court around what we can and cannot do. But I'm optimistic, given the popular support for ending corporate campaign contributions, that it is something that can happen meaningfully, and that even a constitutional amendment in this context is possible. And even short of an amendment, though, there's still other basic things that we can do in Congress and that a responsible legislator would do, like banning insider trading for all members of Congress, right? So let's think about what Ken Calvert did in the mid-2000s, right? He was a sitting member of Congress, bought up vacant parcels of land, earmarked the federal highway transportation dollars for a new development near his own real estate, turned around and sold that real estate for an enormous profit just months later. That should be against the law, period. And we can legislate that. We can pass a law that makes that illegal. We can require members of Congress to put all of their assets into a blind trust, right? So there's no conflict of interest. And these things would be possible if we had representatives who were actually more interested in tackling corruption than they were about enriching themselves. And somebody like Ken Calvert, just look at his financial disclosures from 1992 to the present. This is somebody who went to Congress to become rich. And I am really proud to be retiring him this November, because you don't go to Congress to become rich. That's not the point of the job.
Technical difficulty up here. Sorry for climbing around while you were answering that question. I think this probably dovetails nicely. What issue do you think Ken Calvert is most vulnerable on?
There's a lot to choose from there, right? But look, I think corruption does cut across party lines, and it's not just that initial real estate deal that I was talking about a second ago. There have been a lot of ethical lapses during his time in Congress. So, not just the first one where he uses our tax dollars to line his pockets, but there's also another incident afterwards that was allegedly investigated by a Riverside County grand jury, in which his real estate partnership got access to a parcel of land before it was supposed to be offered to public agency. So they violated, according to the Riverside County grand jury, they violated state law when they got access to that. So this is a symptom of somebody who is using their position to, again, self-enrich. And even though he's claimed he didn't know anything about that deal ahead of time, there are people in his own real estate partnership who have contradicted him about that on the record. And look, when there's smoke, there's fire. And if it were just an isolated incident, maybe you could dismiss it, but it's not. It's happened again and again. Even in the primary, this is somebody who used his franked mailing privileges in May. This is the ability that members of Congress can send mail to everybody at taxpayer expense. They're not supposed to do it within a certain time frame before the election. Just this year, he did it. He sent it to everybody. Courtesy of us, he's trying to promote his own record before that June 7th primary to get his vote total up. This is somebody who just thinks the rules do not apply to him and doesn't care and could care less. And so I think that's where he's got vulnerability, because it's not just about the self-enrichment. It's the fact that you're not delivering for your communities. And we were just talking earlier, how many of us can identify a single accomplishment that this guy has made in his 30 years in office in Riverside County? How many people have ever even seen him in person? right? I mean, not many hands go up, a couple. And it was 1998, right? It's like, I mean, or it was during protest. Right. And I think that's, the story I've heard again and again from people is that when you show up to his office, you ask for a meeting, you place a call, he does not engage. And that is something, again, regardless of party, it tells you something about your character. It tells you something about their work ethic. It tells you something about whether they care about representing anybody who disagrees with them, right? And you have to, if you get this job, you have to care about not just representing the people in your party, the people who always agree with you. You have to care about everybody in the district. That's your job as a representative.
A question from Alan. How will you go about fundraising without becoming beholden to the PACs and corporations? How do you not do what Calvert's doing?
So number one, you refuse to take corporate PACs and you honor that pledge, right? And you stick with it. And you ask people to hold you accountable for it too. And you ask your constituents to hold you accountable. And if I go back on that pledge later, I hope that I get taken out in an election, right? And you have to be somebody whose character, I think when you come into it, you run because you are running for the right reasons. You are running because you see the country as under threat from systemic division. You're running because you see the corrupting influence of money in politics. And you're running because you want to literally make it illegal to take corporate contributions. And then you enact it so there's no longer an option. And the question is, how do we mobilize people to make it happen? Because I know it's possible. Even polling among 90% of Republicans want the same thing that we all want on this, right? 90% of moderates, of independents, excuse me. I mean, we all want this to happen. And so I think the question is, are you willing to stick to your values no matter what? And are you going to put your money where your mouth is when you get in by promoting that legislation that you're talking about when you're campaigning? And so some of the first pieces of legislation that I hope to sign on to are things like what Katie Porter has introduced, right? Some of her legislation around banning corporate campaign contributions, some of her legislation around banning stock trades and making it illegal and leveling that playing field, because the country really should be governed by human beings, not companies with massive profit interests that are never going to align with our own.
If I might add to your question to big endorsements that came in the past few days. We're both for End Citizens United has endorsed Will, and so has Katie Porter's PAC, officially endorsed Will. This question's come in a couple of different formats, so I'm just going to choose one to read. Do you believe you'll be able to win the votes of moderates and independents who are tired of Calvert, but also hesitate to vote for Democrats due to inflation and other factors?
Yes, I do. I do. And look, I think part of winning this district is not just appealing to Democrats. It just is. That's the reality. And I think part of the way that I can do this is by thinking about my own family. And as I said a minute ago, my grandparents were Republicans. My aunts and uncles are Republicans. My grandparents met in the Coast Guard during World War II, came back to Southern California, started a small business. They were lifelong Republicans. And being able to interact with your family when you disagree and still being able to love each other and have respect for each other's character and being able to meet people where they are, it's remarkable how much we have in common. And so what I've noticed and what I think is going to be an effective part of reaching these folks is talking about actual substantive policy. And I know a lot of people say, Democrats, don't do that. It's too complicated. Stick to a simple message that's persuasive. But what I have found in my interactions with my own family and my friends who disagree with me is that when you start talking about what are you actually worried about, what is the actual policy that you're talking about, how do you think it can improve, that's when you see commonality. Because the framing and the messaging on both the right and the left often is designed to just divide people and start them into a base camp from which they will never depart, right? And so if you keep the focus off of Donald Trump, if you keep the focus off of Joe Biden, and you just talk about what is best for your community? What is best for your kids in school? Do you want your kids in school to be worried about mass shootings? I don't, right? Do you think that it's okay for somebody who threatens to shoot up a school to walk into a gun store 4 days later and buy an AR-15? I don't. That's why I'm for red flag laws. I've talked to NRA owners and Republicans who agree with me on that, right? And yet my opponent voted against red flag laws. So when you just talk about those basic facts, and 70% of voters in this district believe that the government should stay out of our bedrooms, by the way, and that women should have the right to control their own bodies. That cuts through party lines. And if you keep the focus on delivering for people right here in Riverside County, whether you're a Democrat who's a nurse or a Republican who's a firefighter, we are all between that $70,000 to $100,000 years and $100,000 median income in the county, right? How much of that income are we paying in taxes compared to the top 400 families in the United States? We should be united around our common collective economic interests in this county, because when we're paying 20 to 30% a year in taxes, and people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are paying zero, I mean, find a Republican who thinks that that's okay, right? We should be united on this. And I think that speaking to those interests and talking specifically about how we can improve lives for people who actually live here is going to be a key to winning those votes.
Has there been any outreach from the Karani campaign or an endorsement of any kind? For those who don't know, Shrina Karani was in the primary. Has there been any outreach from her campaign?
Yes, and by the way, I mean, credit to Shrina Karani. I think she ran a great campaign. We should totally give round of applause. Democratic turnout, and this is, Democratic turnout in this congressional district, we came within 2,000 votes combined of Calvert, and that is thanks to candidates who ran, and Brandon Mosley too, another great candidate in this race. And we should be proud as Democrats to have had 3 great candidates, all under the age of 40, who are talking about our future, right? And that means something. That says something about where the country is headed and where the Republican Party is headed too, right? So she ran a great campaign. She has endorsed me. I was incredibly grateful to have her support after the primary. I had a great conversation with her last week, actually, and she hopefully is going to be helping us out with some town halls and some get out the vote and some canvassing on this side of the district in November and October. And I am a huge fan of her views on climate and her knowledge and her background on climate, because she talked about it in a way that was incredibly meaningful given her background, right? And her experience in the climate space. And she's got some incredible ideas for how to prevent our planet from being destroyed by climate. And so I've been really honored to have some conversations with her about how we do that, right? And she and I both agree, for example, that we've got to get some more clean tech incentives for businesses, because if you look at places like the Salton Sea on the other side of the district, which is just out in the Imperial Valley, just outside of where the 41st ends, one of the largest lithium ion deposits in the United States, and the potential to fuel massive economic growth in our congressional district, and also to revolutionize the way that our economy manufactures and exports some of the batteries that are going to power the 21st century economy. And so when we create incentives for those new high-tech, clean-tech jobs, we not only save our planet, we create high-paying, good manufacturing jobs right here in the United States. And we can also, help reduce the kinds of CO2 emissions that have become all too common when we're sitting in traffic, right? On the 15, the 215, the 10. And I'm really proud to have her support and endorsement, and look forward to working with her in November.
Fantastic. Since you opened the door on climate, we had a couple of climate questions. Try to combine these into maybe one question about how you feel about putting a price on carbon, and how you feel about increasing housing density and more transportation policies that support a more effective approach to climate change.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot a lot to unpack there. I'll start off with the infrastructure piece because we kind of ended on that with the last one. But look, Coachella Valley Rail is a big issue on the other side of this congressional district because there's a huge amount of traffic that goes from LA County into the Coachella Valley. There's a huge amount of tourists going back and forth, and it all honestly backs up a ton of traffic throughout the district, right? Not just the Coachella Valley. That spills into Corona. It spills into the I-15 corridor. And so investing meaningfully in high-speed rail and a Coachella Valley rail is something that I would 100% be committed to because it's going to take cars off the road. It's going to grow the economy in the Coachella Valley. It's going to make everybody's lives much less painful when we're on the road. And we all know how painful it is in Southern California to be sitting in traffic. And so, as I often say, let's stop electing the people who would vote to name a highway after Donald Trump, but wouldn't actually vote to repair the highway, right? So that's one thing we can do is invest in infrastructure to help our climate. Second thing we can do, in addition to those incentives that I was talking about a second ago that can power a new clean tech economy, I think in places like the Coachella Valley, look at what just happened the other day with our water infrastructure and the news about being moved into tier 2 on the Colorado River for the first time in history for cut reductions. And fortunately, California was spared in this initial round. But if you look at what they've been saying about the water level, when it drops to 1,040-ish feet, right? California is also going to be on the chopping block. And we have got to start meaningfully investing in upgrading our water infrastructure. And I believe that this is an absolutely critical issue that, if left unaddressed, is going to devastate our communities. And Riverside County is one of the most vulnerable places in California that's going to have to deal with an ever-increasing drought. And so one of the big things we can do is, and I've talked about from the beginning of the campaign, is trying to work with the other Democratic representatives in California to secure at least $2 billion in federal infrastructure funding to try to modernize our water infrastructure so that we are capturing more water drain off during storms, so that we are trying to modernize some of the agricultural equipment that's used to water plants. That's actually a huge 80% of our water usage is often coming from agriculture. And sometimes we're not using the most efficient tech to do that. And the private sector is not always there and stepping up to help do that. But I think really creating that hybrid mix of incentives to create jobs in the private sector for companies that are meaningfully investing in those new clean tech jobs and also investing in our water infrastructure are going to be two key parts of the next 5 to 10 years here in Riverside County for climate.
Yes. And this was a question from Jill. How do you plan to deal with the issue of homelessness, specifically housing, services, medical coverage? Any thoughts on homelessness?
Yeah, so I mean, any of us who have had family members or friends with mental health issues or addiction know that this issue can be very personal because, you know, I've had friends who have lived on the street because of addiction issues. And I think something that a federal representative needs to start with when it comes to homelessness is empathy, right? And thinking about our own experiences with that and thinking about my own experiences with that has been helpful. And every expert that I've talked to in this area has said the number one thing that we can do for homelessness in Riverside County is increase the supply of affordable housing. And I'm not just talking about truly low income housing that applies to literally people who are on the streets, although we do need that. I'm talking about expanding the overall supply so that there's less pressure across the market and more people get into homes, and so that it becomes more affordable across the county for everybody, right? So part of the way we do that is, again, with investment from the federal government, because unfortunately we've seen time and time again that developers have not been able to meet the demand for affordable housing. And so when I'm elected, I plan to partner with people like Congressman Raul Ruiz, like Congressman Mark Takano, and advocate for our county. Because if we've got 3 U.S. House seats in Riverside County, all held by Democrats who meaningfully care about increasing the supply of affordable housing, that's a huge amount of leverage in Washington compared to what we have now, which is somebody who's actively fighting against affordable housing, who's actively fighting against doing anything about homelessness. Ken Calvert, right? But it's not just housing and spending money that's going to solve this, right? It's pairing that with treatment. Because if you don't do anything about treatment, people are going to be left on the streets. They won't get the help that they need. And one of the things that I've seen talking to folks who run federally health qualified centers across the county is that when you pair treatment with affordable housing in proximity, you see much better results. And you compare that to places like LA County, which has a horrible homelessness problem right now. And they've got low cost subsidized housing, where folks are having to take an hour bus ride to and from treatment. In places like Palm Springs, actually, the Desert AIDS Project, which has affordable housing, pairs that with a treatment center right across the street, 200 yards away. And their rates of success are much higher. And so I think trying to advocate for, pairing that meaningful, affordable housing with treatment in a walkable setting is a critical part of tackling this issue. And I really look forward to advocating for that when I'm elected.
I'm going to paraphrase this one a smidge because I don't necessarily agree with the opening premise that everybody thinks this midterm favors the GOP. I don't think we think that. How can we help motivate Democrats, though, in what is being talked about as a difficult midterm for the Democrats? What can you do to motivate folks to come out who maybe aren't feeling motivated yet?
Well, maybe that preface was written before the vote in Kansas a couple of weeks ago. Maybe, because I think that, look, women's reproductive freedom is on the line this November. And when you've got a Republican-controlled Congress and people like Mitch McConnell already talking about a national abortion ban, it is a very real possibility that that could pass. We should take them at their words. They said for decades they wanted to overturn Roe. Ken Calvert joined the lawsuit to overturn Roe, and it got overturned. They did exactly what they said. They've now started talking about a national ban. People like Ken Calvert have voted to allow child predators to sue to prevent their victims from getting an abortion. They've voted against bipartisan legislation designed to protect women from going, when they're harassed, going into a Planned Parenthood clinic. He just voted against the bill that would have made it a federal law to protect contraception access across the United States. He voted against the legislation just a couple weeks ago that was designed to allow women the freedom to leave states where abortion is now illegal to protect their right to travel. So this is a radical opponent. And when I mentioned that stat earlier about 70% of the voters in this district who believe that women should have the freedom to control their own bodies, I think that is an incredibly powerful motivator. And I could not be more proud to be standing with everybody in this fight who believes the government should stay out of our bedrooms and that women should have freedom of their reproductive choice to start a family whenever they want to. And so I think that's a huge part of winning this November.
Will's also been endorsed by Planned Parenthood and NARO and National Organization of Women. So
Totally unbiased.
totally unbiased. Will be coming to local colleges and high schools to get young folks involved.
Yes, and we were talking about this, some of us earlier, about our get out the vote strategy. And I think, as I said earlier, I do want to win some no party preference votes. I want to win some from moderate Republicans, but the registration trends in this congressional district have looked great for Democrats. So for those of you who don't know, we're already up now for the first time in Calvert's history since he was first elected. Democrats have a couple thousand vote registration advantage. And every time yeah. That's a huge deal. And every time you refresh the registrar, there are more and more Democrats in this congressional district. And that is thanks to the incredible work that people are doing all over registering new voters. And so what we plan to do, and we've got a new field director, Matt, right over there, another Matt. What we're planning to do as we head into November is to continue those registration drives, right? We're going to try to make sure that we're going to high schools. We're working with organizations like Inspire to Vote, which we talked about earlier, which is a group that has folks, kids register on their phones when they turned 18. and it texts them reminders about when the election's coming. They sign a pledge, and they've seen actually a huge success in the ability to get folks to come and turn out when they get the text reminder. And talking about the issues that we were just a second ago, right? Like if you're a kid, do you really want to live in a California that no longer has access to contraception because the Republican Party has taken over Congress and taken over the White House and has decided that they want to impose their views of what happens in your bedroom onto you? I mean, we can become the party of small government in this sense, right? It's remarkable, but the fact that they've now taken such an extreme position enables candidates like me to talk to young folks and say, do you want the government making this decision for you, or do you want to be in charge of your own? You start your own family. So I think, continuing those efforts and working with Matt and developing our field operation. And for those of you who are interested in helping with that, you can go to our website, a volunteer link. It's willrollinsforcongress.com. And we need all the help we can get to get folks registered, because it's going to be a crucial part of winning.
Anyone isn't registered to vote, we have folks here, any of our volunteers with the campaign tonight can help with that. They can help you check and make sure you're registered, if you've changed your address, if you've changed your name, anything. We want to make sure that everyone votes. And so if you have any questions about that, flag one of the volunteers before you leave tonight. Those are all the questions I've received from the cards. Has anyone been inspired with a question they'd like to ask?
How do I get you debating this?
The question is how to debate with Calvert.
Next time you see him, tell him I'm asking. Historically, as you all probably know, I mean, he's refused to debate pretty much everybody who's challenged him, right? And I will say that we are working on that right now. I do think that the press is interested in seeing this happen. I'm hopeful that the press will put pressure on him to make this happen. Elections are about a contest of ideas. And I think if you don't have the strength to stand up and tell voters why you're a better choice than your opponent, and meaningfully debate, why you voted against things like expanding Bundy Road in Menifee, and why you voted against things like expanding the I-15 corridor, and why you voted against capping costs for seniors at $2,000 a year for medication, why you voted against allowing Medicare to negotiate directly for prescription drugs. You're not fit to serve in Congress. You should, at a minimum, have the courage to face your constituents and explain each and every one of those decisions about why you've consistently voted that direction. And
if not, stand up for his accomplishments.
right, or announce. Yes, he said it, or stand up for your accomplishments, and that's absolutely right. And he should if he's got any accomplishments, he should. We look forward to hearing about those, and then double checking them on the internet. So,
Question from the gentleman in blue.
Wages, of course, being stagnant federally at 7.25. But the reality is that in 2017, right after Trump was sworn in, FHA was set to reduce mortgage premiums, thereby making it more affordable for middle Americans to buy a house with FHA mortgage. That clock stopped. We reversed that decision, and for the last 5 years, everyone's ignored. Meanwhile, FHA is breaking in ridiculous amounts of mortgage insurance. There's record low, no one's losing their houses. They're not paying out the insurance. So they're making huge amounts of money and going in secondary markets. That's exactly what federal representatives are doing. Should be dealing with what your intentions are with FHA and federal insurance.
100%.
Can you repeat the question for the folks?
Yeah. So the question was, and I'll summarize it. In 2017, FHA was scheduled to basically help reduce mortgage premiums, and the point that the gentleman just made is that, yeah, got me here. So was that, homelessness is not always a product of addiction and mental health. And that's absolutely right. It's a crisis of affordability too. And so, yeah, I mean, when I'm elected, trying to make sure that FHA actually does meaningfully reduce mortgage premiums and expands access to folks again across, and that was sort of the point I was trying to make earlier about expanding the availability of affordable housing across income ranges, because it releases pressure across the market more broadly. And so hopefully we can have, FHA actually reduce those premiums. And I'd be really interested to talk to you a little bit more about this afterwards, because the amount of money that FHA is making is a piece of the story that actually I haven't been as familiar with. So looking forward to chatting about that.
The other issue is, and this is actually specifically Riverside County, is the conforming loan limits are set as a county. And of course, Riverside is a massive county. So you have this area around 15, which it is incredibly expensive to buy a house. And the conforming loan limit is incredibly low. But because they're included in areas like Zizix and Victorville and places where, $1.95 would buy you 5 acres of land. And they're figuring out that this is the average cost in Riverside. It's honestly ridiculous.
It's a great point. So he just said also that the conforming loan limit in Riverside County is county-wide. And so you have different, home prices obviously across the county. And it reminded me a little bit of Orange County, which just saw its first median home price cross $1 million for the first time in history last year. And Riverside County is not going to be far behind that. And it also reminds me of the 2017 tax cuts, because with the SALT deduction being taken off the table, and with the mortgage interest deduction being capped at a lower rate in places like California where homes are more expensive, this was again something that my opponent voted for and ended up screwing all of us, because we've got homes that are much more expensive, and a representative who truly cared about representing the people who he lives with should be actually voting against legislation like that to keep the cost of housing down in his own congressional district. And 100% agree that we need a representative who sees it that way, and look forward to chatting more about it.
Maria, have a question?
Yes.
What are your thoughts on congressional term limits? Suspending the Supreme Court.
Okay, the question was thoughts on congressional term limits, filibuster, and expanding the Supreme Court. Okay, so I'm going to try and take those in order. Congressional term limits. Selfishly, after having run for 9 months, it is brutal running for Congress, you guys. But look, two years for House Rep, I think is, I think that's fair. It's just what's broken is the campaign finance system, because what we shouldn't have happen is people like me needing to spend 90% of their time fundraising to be competitive. That is absurd. And it also creates a huge barrier to entry, because look, I'm lucky to have a partner who's willing to say, okay, you can quit your job. You want to do this. I think this is good for our communities. I will support the household for a year. There are a lot of people who can't do that. And I know that the best people probably to have in government are the people who can't afford to do it. And if we don't fix our campaign finance system, that will never happen. And so I am 100% committed to trying to work on that problem and doing it for and advocating for that for as long as humanly possible. And I think that, when you've got somebody in like Ken Calvert, who's been there for 30 years, 2-year cycle is one thing, but staying for 30, and I'll be honest, I've got mixed feelings on this, because yeah. Right. Right. And we what's your feel of what it should be? I think we need to strike the balance there between having enough years in where you've got experience to meaningfully deliver and work on difficult and complex issues, but not so long that you're not getting fresh ideas and fresh leadership into the House. And where that magic number is really tough to say, because I admire some members in the House who have been for a long time, who haven't, I think, lost sight of what matters. But one thing I think both parties should be doing more of is mentoring new folks and newer generations and bringing them up. And I've been very grateful to people like U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer, people like Congresswoman Jackie Spear, who have been really helpful to me in my campaign in talking to me. And I think we need more of that kind of leadership so that we can get new folks in. And I think filibuster, we've got to get rid of that. And look, I think that this is a relic of Jim Crow in a lot of ways. It is something that has been used again and again and again to beat back crucial progress on things like voting rights. And as I see this midterm, part of the reason it's so crucial that we take the House and pick up a few more seats in the Senate is so that we can protect our democracy long term. And if you've got folks who are willing to filibuster legislation that's designed to prevent it from being a felony in Georgia to hand somebody a bottle of water while they're waiting in line, that is anti-democratic. And the filibuster itself is anti-democratic. And so I'm optimistic, though, that we can keep the House, and especially after seeing votes like what happened in Kansas. And I think looking at the Senate, there's some very, very winnable seats in the Senate, too. And if we expand our majority by a few, I think that legislation and things like voting rights are going to be possible in November. And the last point on Supreme Court reform, boy, I think, I think all Americans want a court that is independent, a judiciary that is meaningfully independent. That is the point of that branch. That is the point of Article 3, right? And what's happened is we've had one party game the system and break so many of our unwritten norms about how to keep that judiciary meaningfully independent, yet also a reflection of the people's will, that we have gotten things like Roe versus Wade overturned. The first time, arguably, in history that an individual constitutional right was taken away from Americans. And that is a product not just of the court itself, I think, and the political process that's been used to confirm justices being broken, but also the Electoral College. Republicans have won the popular vote one time since 1988. George W. Bush, 2004. That is remarkable that they have a 6-3 majority on the court. And that is just not reflective of the will of the American people. And there has to be a balance between that popular will and also an independent judiciary. And so what I would support doing is looking at something like having federal circuit judges have a minimum of 10 years experience and then randomly rotate onto the court so that neither party could game the system as effectively. And it's much more difficult to predict a judge's partisan rulings after 10 years on a federal appellate court. I would support things like maybe randomizing cert petitions. These are the petitions that litigants will file seeking the Supreme Court review of their case at the circuit court level. If you randomize which cases are heard, much more difficult for justices to go in and hand pick a case that's designed to overturn Roe, for example. They're just deciding more impartially. So I think we should absolutely look at it, because the issue is it's faith, the American people's faith in the court as an institution has diminished rapidly and dramatically these last few years, and we've got to restore it. And I think that long term, no matter which party you belong to, we want a judiciary that's independent.
We're nearly out of time. Is there one more question, or we've got one online, I think.
From the internet, what do you think of an occupancy tax for people that buy homes and then don't live in them or rent them out?
Oh, an occupancy tax for folks who buy homes and don't rent them out or don't live in them?
That is from Chris.
I'd have to think about that, to be honest with you. I'd have to think more about it. I haven't heard a lot of folks talking about that at the federal level. You know, I mean, my sort of gut on things like this is when you're talking about big scale developers and folks whose income is at a certain threshold, 200 million per year plus, for example, and folks are buying real estate and leaving it empty. And this could be a way to address affordable housing. I think when you create the right incentives for tax purposes and you actually create some meaningful accountability for tax evasion, like the famous stat from when Mitt Romney ran in 2012, right? Paid about 2 or 3% on 200 million plus in income. Yeah, we've got to look at how we make billionaires and millionaires pay their fair share, and whether that comes in the form of things like an occupancy tax for major real estate developers who are buying up property and not using them or using them as investments. I think, you know, there's got to be some openness to that, and I definitely would be interested in chatting with that whoever asked that on the internet.
Chris.
More about it. Yeah.
Talk to Chris.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks to all of you. I hope you got your questions answered and enjoyed this awesome opportunity with your awesome candidate. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Will, do you have any parting words, or should I get you over to the selfie line?
Well, before the selfie line, I'll just, say again, thank you to everybody for showing up, and thank you for caring about the future of the United States. And, it'd be a privilege to represent each and every one of you in Congress. I look forward to continuing to working my ass off into November. And thank you for all of the help that you've all given too. And don't forget to tell your Republican family and friends about me too. We need some of their votes. Oh, so if you have a question that I'm happy to chat a little bit more over here. And then also always Will Rollins for Congress. There's contact information on there too. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. We'll meet you over here in a few moments by the pagoda.